You're watching St. Michael's Journal, the Journal of Exorcism. On the day of his scheduled execution, a convicted serial killer gets a last-minute court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. The killer surprises the psychiatrist with his claim that instead of trying to avoid his fate, he is in fact a demon who wants the execution to go forward, and further claims that before their brief time together is over, the doctor will commit 3 murders of his own. If at the time of this essay you were looking for a movie to see at the theater near you, the preceding synopsis was prominently displayed following the motion picture titled Nefarious. This most recent project of filmmakers Cary Solomon and Chuck Konzelman takes on a very different tone and tenor than their previous efforts, which have brought some of the most popular and inspirational faith-based movies to the marketplace. The executive producer of Nefarious, Steve Dace, is also the author of the best-selling novel that the production is based upon. In Dace's fictional work, convicted killer Edward Wayne Brady must undergo a final psychiatric evaluation before the state of Oklahoma can carry out the death warrant. If Brady can be found to be suffering from a severe mental condition, then he will be found ineligible for execution, even though he was found guilty by a jury of his peers, after a trial which the prosecution produced incontrovertible evidence along with a confession. A highly accredited psychiatrist, a Dr. James Martin, is retained to perform an impartial review, but his preconceived understanding of the situation and his secular worldview prevents him from engaging with the true nature of the reality presented before him. The condemned man is possessed by a demon named Nefarious. A shocking dialogue unfolds between the 2 men in the room, the psychiatrist and the demonically possessed inmate, that exposes evil and spiritual truth. This interaction between 2 characters makes the dominant theme of the production apparent. Evil is all around us, in both the often unnoticed ignorance of modern banality and in glaringly obvious manifestations. Nefarious explains to Dr. Martin that the process of demonic possession begins with the intended victim being confronted with a series of moral dilemmas. By accepting as right that which should obviously be wrong, the victim gradually acclimates himself to the normalization of evil. Nefarious states that we offer up a series of temptations, gradually increasing in terms of duration and intensity and degree of moral inequity. The implication of this process, as explained by the fictional demon Nefarious, is that seemingly small moral infractions like petty theft and religious ambivalence pave the way for greater misdeeds by numbing our hearts and senses to the damaging effects of evil. This concept is further driven home when Nefarious tells Dr. Martin that the psychiatrist will have committed 3 murders before Brady, the murderer, is executed. Under the impression that he was just living life like any other millennial in the 21st century, Martin was oblivious to the fact that he had already committed 2 of the 3 murders. He believed he was simply granting his dying mother, Death with Dignity, by authorizing her euthanasia, and because he wasn't yet ready to be a father, Martin had pressured his girlfriend into getting an abortion. Both of these are tacit acts of killing, albeit products of the casual cruelty contemporary society extols as virtues. Carrie Solomon, in an interview conducted by Billy Hallowell for CBN.com, said, "Nefarious is a movie that speaks of important and eternal truths and addresses an obsession with the occult overtaking portions of society. We believe every single word of what we said in it. I believe it's a contemporary problem in our society. The occult is everywhere. Young people don't understand that they're playing with fire." Hallowell also wrote that Chuck Konzelman hopes the themes in Nefarious help bring people who would never go near a church to stop and consider the true battle raging between good and evil. Most media outlets have published reviews on Nefarious, some of which offer glowing testimony, such as the one at Breitbart written by Paul Boy after his exclusive interview with co-directors Konzelman and Solomon. The duo, also credited with the highly successful films God's Not Dead and Unplanned, described their most recent work as a more mature version of C.S. Lewis's satirical work, The Screwtape Letters. While the demon Nefarious is lecturing the psychiatrist to the workings of possession, Lewis's demon Screwtape mentors his nephew Wormwood in how to effect the same. The Breitbart correspondent quoted Solomon and Konzelman as stating, "The world is definitely ensconced in evil. Doing this movie, we wanted to reveal that there is evil, there is good. There is the devil, and there is God. What we perceive as a cultural battle is actually a spiritual battle, and the film is actually about pulling the veil away from that fact." Leah Marie-Ann Klett, an assistant editor at the Christian Post, reported on the spiritual battle that unfolded during the filming of Nefarious. She writes, "When Nefarious directors Carrie Solomon and Chuck Konzelman first conceived of bringing the spiritual thriller to the big screen, they knew they would face unseen opposition. But the duo didn't know just how much. In their words, the devil didn't want this movie to be made." Ms. Klett's review describes bizarre events ranging from a possessed squirrel breaking into their Airbnb only to ravage a nativity set, which when you think about it, that does seem a bit unusual, to more serious events such as the cast and crew being afflicted with strange ailments throughout the making of the film. Konzelman told the Christian Post writer that the first day of filming, Steve Dace, the executive producer and author of the novel, visited the set. He got very sick with a cyst under his arm. Then just as suddenly, the cyst disappeared, only to return with a vengeance the morning before the theatrical premiere. By nightfall, he's in the emergency room, near death, with a severe, nearly fatal staph infection in his bloodstream that required emergency surgery. Other occurrences included a Catholic priest hired to be on the set for his expertise in exorcisms, who nearly died from a burst appendix. While during the first 11 days of shooting, 8 members of the crew were all involved in severe auto accidents. After the film opened, Events began to occur across the nation, such as fire alarms inexplicably going off, computer errors causing people to be unable to purchase tickets when the system showed certain theaters as being sold out, when in fact there were seats available. Finally, according to Konzelman in his interview with the Christian Post, there were numerous reports of people growling and vomiting in the theaters during the showing and not being aware of the events when they woke up. Solomon told Miss Klett, "We had a friend tell us a long time ago, for those people that don't believe in the devil, declare war against him and see what happens." According to the Christian Post, despite the continuing paranormal opposition, the film received a 97% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, the American Review aggregation website for film and television. And Nefarious grossed $1.3 million in its opening weekend, while competing for an audience with two other horror films. Other authors offering the general public reviews of Nefarious approach the subject from other angles. Sonika Campbell, for example, asked rhetorically, "Is Nefarious based on a true story?" Well, at least that was the title of her article appearing on the cinemaholic.com website. Campbell compared the plotline of Nefarious to the case of Peter William Sutcliffe, who brutally murdered 13 women and whose heinous acts inspired the series titled The Yorkshire Ripper. In both real-life cases of Sutcliffe, as well as that of the fictional Nefarious, we find that the killer claims to have been influenced by supernatural powers. Here at St. Michael's Journal, after reading that Nefarious was said to be similar to real-life possessions, we once again opened up old files to review those cases we have been tracking here in the Midwest in which the perpetrator claimed paranormal influences. As the title of this essay implies, we found an intersectional relationship between fictional works such as Nefarious and real-life crime drama. In 2016, Jason Brian Dalton, an Uber driver in Kalamazoo, Michigan, was arrested and confessed to his crimes, but blamed his actions on his Uber mobile app. Dalton claimed that its symbol resembled that of the Order of the Eastern Star and that it took over his body during the events after he pressed the button of a new app resembling the devil when it abruptly popped up. On the recordings made of Dalton's statement during the questioning, he can be heard telling officers that the minute I logged on, to be honest with you, I don't know what happened. I know you guys are going to have a hard time believing this, but it literally took over my mind and body. I just tapped it, and there was like a devil head that popped up. It was some sort of like horned head, like a cow head or something. I pressed that button, and that's where all the problems went after that. Local police reported that Dalton had no known prior criminal history or mental health record before he went on a shooting spree, murdering 6 people and wounding 2 others as he drove through the community. After numerous delays and psychiatric evaluations, Dalton's case was set to go to trial on 7 January 2019, but he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In 2017, St. Michael's Journal reported on the bizarre case of Rachel Hilliard, who had asked a friend where she could get an exorcism. This inquiry led to the exorcism of a locale being performed by Reverend Terry Fox, who was, ironically, a Baptist minister and not a Catholic priest, such as those that most people believe are the only ministers to perform exorcisms. Writing for Kansas.com, Oliver Morrison reported how Reverend Fox and his assistants had performed a spiritual house cleansing and blessing, a similar procedure to the rite of exorcism of a locale that banishes demons from a home or place. Fox related to Morrison how that he and his team were attempting to evaluate Hilliard in order to determine if her condition was mental or demonically related, when just days after visiting her home to rid it of demons, he heard the news while traveling that Hilliard had been arrested for the decapitation of her ex-mother-in-law. Following her arrest, a detective asked Hilliard about the incident and reported, Rachel spontaneously stated it seemed like she was coming at me with a picture frame, and this has happened before, like deja vu. God was telling me to do it. Hilliard was declared unfit to stand trial in January 2018. However, later that year, she was deemed to be competent following treatment at a state psychiatric facility. When her case finally went to trial, she characterized the killing of her former boyfriend's mother as an overreaction, prosecutors said. But on other occasions, she supposedly claimed she needed to decapitate Davis to free her soul so it could reach heaven. Rachel Hilliard wrote a series of long-winded, cryptic letters to the judge overseeing her case, claiming an exorcism was responsible for Davis's beheading. This was actually the second time they had been to the house. I'm not sure which entity deals with negligent illegal exorcisms, but I can assure you one was conducted. Using all capital letters, Hilliard also referenced haunted houses, aliens, methamphetamines, and claimed she had been under a trance-like spell. She even doodled crucifixes and spiritual ideas in the letter. I just wanted to send this out before they throw me in the psych ward and over-medicate me, she also scribbled. Eventually, Hilliard was convicted of murder. Her sentence was upheld by the Supreme Court of Kansas, that of life in prison without the possibility of parole for 50 years. Heinous acts such as that committed by Rachel Hilliard always bring with them the question, was this woman so evil that she attempted to convince investigators and a jury of her peers that she was under the influence of drugs? Or was she insane, as her attorney suggested? Or was she, in fact, actually possessed by the devil? What led Hilliard to commit the grisly murder of Mickey Davis is a question we may never have the answer to. Another seemingly senseless crime St. Michael's Journal was following at that time, a crime whose only similarity to the Rachel Hilliard case was that of the perpetrator claiming God told him to murder, just as Rachel claimed, was the case of Adam Housley, the 35-year-old semi-truck driver who insisted it was God who told him to drive his truck into the rear of another vehicle stopped at a traffic light. Tisha Briggs, 48, and Leo Walker, 47, were westbound on U.S. Route 60 and stopped at one of the only two stoplights in Seymour, Missouri, a once prosperous agricultural community that has evolved into one of the so-called bedroom communities, such as those encircling any modern city. The only hint these days of Seymour's past glory to agriculture is the sprawling Amish community to the north and west of town. Those passing through the stoplight at Highway 60 and West Clinton Avenue, when not preoccupied by watching the Amish people going about their quaint way of life, driving their horses and buggies on the shoulder of the road, might have noticed the black scar on the pavement resulting from a burning vehicle. You see, Briggs and Walker perished on that spot. That burn scar on Highway 60 when Housley ran his 18-wheeler into the stopped pickup truck the pair were riding in. According to a probable cause statement, a witness told investigators that Housley never hit the brakes before crashing into the back of a pickup truck that was sitting at a red light on US 60 east of West Clinton Avenue just after 3 p.m. Troopers say the pickup truck was pushed into the back of another semi-trailer that was sitting in front of it. Briggs and Walker were pronounced dead at the scene. The statement says Housley was combative with Missouri State Highway Patrol troopers when they arrested him after the crash. Once troopers wrangled Housley to the ground, he allegedly said, "God told me to do it, and it's my destiny." Housley was initially charged with murder, but prosecutor Ben Bergstresser eventually recommended to the Webster County Court that Housley be charged with involuntary manslaughter after two experts, one working for the defense and one for the state, determined that Housley was having a psychotic episode when he made the statements about God telling him to cause the crash, and that his episode had possibly started before the crash. Bergstresser said that this diagnosis would make it impossible to prove intent, so he recommended to the court that Housley be placed on probation. On Wednesday, May 15, 2019, the judge agreed with the prosecutor's recommendation and sentenced Housley to time served, the 2 years in the county jail waiting for trial, and 5 years probation, with several severe restrictions during the probationary period, including the prohibition of driving a semi-truck. In our 2017 report at St. Michael's Journal, we attempted to demonstrate that it was not God that commanded these people to murder innocents, but other contributing factors. In that piece I wrote, "More years ago than I care to remember, I was a volunteer with local fire and rescue agencies and occasionally assisted a private ambulance company which was owned by a friend. This was years before the widespread use of emergency medical technicians or paramedics in this area. One of the law enforcement agencies called my friend's ambulance service that night and asked that he dispatch a crew to the scene of an accident north of town. I was asked to ride along to assist. Upon arrival, we found that a young man had somehow stepped in front of a tractor-trailer unit and had received multiple compound fractures on both his legs, from the thighs to the ankles, the width of the wounds being about the same as the width of the dual tires commonly found on those type trucks. We applied dressings necessary to address the bleedings and splinted the legs to prevent further injury from movement, as was common practice at the time. And the operator drove the ambulance as fast as possible to the hospital. During transport, the other attendant and I noted how the patient apparently felt little or no pain and was seemingly coherent, at least enough to carry on a basic conversation. We both felt at the time that the probability was very great that this patient was under the effect of illicit drugs. That opinion was also shared by the staff at the hospital. In fact, the attending nurse had the following conversation with this unfortunate soul. The nurse asked, "What made you want to walk out in front of a diesel truck?" The patient replied, "Why, the Lord told me to walk out in front of that big diesel truck." She said, "No, honey, I don't think it was the Lord. I think it was those drugs you're on." "What?" he replied. "You mean I done all this for nothing?" I personally witnessed this verbal exchange firsthand. You see, in those days, few ambulance attendants used disposable rubber gloves as they do today. And I was standing at the sink next to the trauma room bed where the victim was laying, washing the man's blood from my hands, as I contemplated on what I later realized was to be my first encounter with someone who was possessed, not by drugs, but by something far more sinister. So we ask rhetorically, what is the root of this phenomenon? That of people committing horrible acts and then claiming that they were instructed to do so by God. Is it simply the effects of drug-induced delusion or mental illness? Far too many times, we read transcripts of interviews conducted by law enforcement investigators with the perpetrators of these crimes, and in the words of the suspect we find, "I don't know what come over me," or "I don't know why I did that," or in some rare cases they claim to have no knowledge or memories of the event whatsoever. Why is that? In regards to these cases in which the suspect honestly has no knowledge of why he or she committed the act, or those who heard a voice telling them to murder, there are no rational people that truly believe it was indeed God who compelled the accused to take someone's life. No, we who have worked in this field know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the real-life murderer was in a similar situation as the condemned man in the movie, a man possessed by a demon known as Nefarious.